In a world where strength is measured by muscle mass and confidence by volume, Maya Rodriguez stood barely 5 feet tall in her oversized training gear, watching seasoned fighters dismiss her with sideways glances and muffled laughter. They saw a quiet college student who looked like she belonged in a library, not a mixed martial arts gym where warriors were forged through blood, sweat, and unbreakable determination. What they didn't know was that behind her gentle brown eyes burned the fury of 1,000 betrayals, the pain of a childhood stolen by violence, and the deadly precision of someone who had learned that survival wasn't about size. It was about strategy, speed, and the willingness to endure more pain than your opponent could imagine inflicting. In 6 months, this weak little girl would transform their sacred training ground into her personal classroom, where she would teach every doubter a lesson they would never forget. This is the story of how the underestimated became the unstoppable, and how mockery became the fuel for one of the most remarkable transformations ever witnessed in competitive fighting. The lesson was about to begin, and Maya Rodriguez was the teacher they never saw coming. Maya Rodriguez pushed through the heavy glass doors of Iron Fist Academy at exactly 6:30 on a Tuesday evening in March, her backpack slung over one shoulder and a water bottle clutched in her trembling hand. The smell hit her immediately, a mixture of sweat, leather, and something she couldn't quite identify but would later learn was the metallic scent of ambition mixed with fear. The gym sprawled before her like a cathedral of combat, with heavy bags hanging from the ceiling like silent sentinels, their surfaces scarred and dented from countless hours of punishment. Wrestling mats covered most of the floor space, their blue surfaces marked with tape that had been peeled and replaced so many times that ghost lines remained from previous configurations. Along the far wall, a collection of weights stood organized in perfect rows, as if waiting for soldiers to report for duty. Maya had imagined this moment for 3 months, ever since she had walked past the gym every day on her way to classes at the nearby community college. She had pressed her face against the window like a child at a candy store, watching the fighters move with a grace that seemed to defy their obvious strength. There was something about the controlled violence, the disciplined chaos, that called to something deep inside her chest. She had finally worked up the courage to walk in after Marcus Chon, a guy from her psychology class, had mentioned he trained here. Marcus was everything Maya wasn't: confident, loud, quick with jokes that made everyone laugh. He stood 6 feet tall and carried himself like someone who had never questioned his right to take up space in the world. When she had quietly mentioned her interest in learning self-defense, Marcus had laughed and patted her shoulder like she was a little sister who had just announced she wanted to be an astronaut. "Maya, you're like 5 feet tall and probably weigh less than my gym bag," he had said with that easy smile that made girls in their class giggle. "Maybe try yoga or something more your speed. This place would eat you alive." But Maya had already made up her mind. She had been eaten alive before, and she was still standing. The receptionist, a woman with arms covered in intricate tattoos and a smile that seemed genuine, looked up from her computer. "First time here, honey?" Maya nodded, suddenly aware of how her voice might sound too quiet in this place where everything seemed to echo with authority. "I want to learn to fight." The woman, whose name tag read Samantha, studied Maya for a moment. She took in the oversized hoodie that hung loose on Maya's small frame, the way she stood with her shoulders slightly hunched as if trying to make herself even smaller, and the determined set of her jaw that suggested this wasn't a decision made lightly. "You sure about that? We've got some pretty intense programs here. Most people start with our fitness classes to build up some strength first." Before Maya could respond, a voice boomed across the gym. "Sam, who's the new recruit?" Coach Danny Morrison approached them, and Maya had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. He stood well over 6 feet, with the kind of build that suggested he had spent decades turning his body into a weapon. His head was shaved bald, and a scar ran from just above his left eyebrow to his temple, giving him the appearance of someone who had earned his knowledge through experience rather than books. "Danny, this is—" Samantha paused, realizing she hadn't gotten Maya's name. "Maya Rodriguez," Maya said, extending her hand and forcing herself to maintain eye contact. She had learned long ago that respect had to be earned, and it started with simple things like handshakes and looking people in the eye. Danny's handshake was firm but not crushing, and Maya caught him making the same assessment that Samantha had. She was used to this by now, the slight hesitation people had when they tried to figure out what to do with her. "What brings you here, Maya?" The question was simple, but Maya knew the answer was complicated. How could she explain the nights she lay awake wondering if she would ever feel safe walking alone? How could she describe the feeling of always looking over her shoulder, always calculating exits and escape routes, always feeling like prey in a world full of predators? I want to learn to defend myself. Danny nodded slowly. Fair enough. Have you ever done any kind of martial arts before? Boxing? Wrestling? Anything? No, sir. Don't call me sir. Danny's fine. He gestured toward the main training area. Tell you what, why don't you watch tonight's class? See if this is really what you want to get into. We train hard here, Maya. This isn't cardio kickboxing or point sparring. We prepare people for real situations. Maya followed Danny toward the mats, where about 15 people were warming up. The group was almost entirely male, ranging in age from what looked like late teens to men in their 40s. They moved through their stretches with the casual confidence of people who belonged here, their conversations flowing easily over topics Maya didn't understand, submissions and takedowns and combinations that sounded like a foreign language. Marcus was among them, and when he spotted Maya, his expression shifted from surprise to something that might have been embarrassment. He jogged over with that same easy smile, but Maya could see the confusion in his eyes. Maya, I didn't expect to see you here. Are you checking the place out? I'm thinking about joining. Marcus glanced around at the other fighters, then back at Maya. Listen, maybe we could grab coffee after this and talk about some other options? There are some great self-defense courses designed specifically for women at the community center. Much more beginner-friendly. Before Maya could respond, Danny's voice cut through the ambient noise. All right, everyone, let's get started. We're working on basic combinations tonight. Then, we'll do some light sparring. The class began with what Danny called a warm-up, but which looked to Maya like a workout that would leave her unable to walk the next day. The fighters moved through jumping jacks, burpees, and something called mountain climbers that made several of them grunt with effort. Then came the stretching, which involved positions that seemed to require joints to bend in ways Maya wasn't sure hers could manage. Basic combinations turned out to mean sequences of punches and kicks that the fighters threw at heavy bags with a force that made the entire frame shake. Maya watched them pivot and strike, their movements flowing together like a deadly dance. Some of them had clearly been doing this for years. Their techniques were crisp and powerful, each movement flowing seamlessly into the next. Others were obviously newer, their punches lacking the snap of the experienced fighters, their footwork sometimes clumsy. But even the beginners moved with more confidence than Maya felt standing there watching. Then came the sparring. Danny paired the fighters carefully, making sure that skill levels and sizes were roughly matched. Maya watched as they donned protective gear, headgear, gloves, shin guards, and stepped onto the mats. What followed was a controlled form of combat that was unlike anything Maya had ever seen in movies or on television. These weren't wild brawls or choreographed fight scenes. The fighters moved with careful precision, testing each other with jabs and kicks, looking for openings, responding to attacks with blocks and counters that seemed almost conversational in their back-and-forth rhythm. Marcus was paired with another college-aged guy, and Maya found herself studying his movements carefully. He was good, better than she had expected. His punches were clean, and his footwork was solid, even if he lacked the fluid grace of some of the more experienced fighters. But it was the women who really caught Maya's attention. There were 3 of them, and they moved with a controlled aggression that made Maya's pulse quicken. One, a redhead who couldn't have been much taller than Maya herself, was sparring with a guy who outweighed her by at least 50 pounds. She moved like water around his attacks, slipping punches and responding with quick combinations that snapped his head back and made him grunt with surprise. That's Jennifer, Samantha said, appearing beside Maya. She's been training here for about 2 years. Started out just like you. No experience. Wanted to learn self-defense. Now she competes in amateur tournaments. Maya watched Jennifer avoid a high kick and respond with a low kick that buckled her opponent's leg. How long did it take her to get that good? Jennifer's special. She's got natural athleticism, and she trains 6 days a week. But more than that, she's got heart. You can teach technique, but you can't teach someone to want it bad enough. The sparring session ended, and the fighters gathered around Danny for what he called a debrief. He offered corrections and suggestions, praising good technique and pointing out areas for improvement. His feedback was direct but never harsh, and Maya noticed that even his criticism seemed to energize the fighters rather than deflate them. Same time Thursday, everyone. Marcus, work on keeping your guard up when you throw that right cross. Jennifer, beautiful work tonight. But remember to check those leg kicks. They're going to add up over time. As the class began to break up, several of the fighters approached Maya. Some introduced themselves with genuine warmth, asking if she was planning to join. Others seemed curious about what had brought her there, and their questions were friendly rather than judgmental. But Maya also caught the subtle exchanges, glances between some of the male fighters, whispered comments that she wasn't meant to hear. She saw Marcus talking quietly with two of his training partners, and, while she couldn't make out the words, their body language suggested they were discussing her presence. Danny appeared at her elbow. "So what do you think?" Maya looked around the gym, at the heavy bags that seemed to challenge anyone brave enough to approach them, at the mats where she had just watched ordinary people transform into warriors, at the fighters who were now chatting and laughing as they packed their gear. "I want to start tomorrow." Danny studied her face for a long moment. "Maya, I need to be straight with you. This isn't going to be easy. Most people who walk through those doors thinking they want to learn to fight change their minds after the first week. It hurts, it's exhausting, and it's humbling. You're going to get hit, and you're going to hit back, and you're going to discover muscles you didn't know you had when they're screaming at you the next morning. I understand. Do you? Because I see a lot of people come through here looking for something. Confidence, fitness, a way to work out their anger. And that's fine, those are good reasons. But the ones who stick around, the ones who really learn to fight, they're here because they need to be. There's something driving them that goes deeper than wanting to get in shape or feel tough." Maya met his gaze steadily. "I need to be here." Danny nodded slowly. "Fair enough. Be here tomorrow at 6:30. Wear clothes you can move in, and be prepared to work harder than you ever have in your life." "And Maya?" "Yes. Don't let anyone tell you that you don't belong here. You decide that for yourself." As Maya walked toward the exit, she heard Marcus call her name. She turned to see him approaching with two of his training partners, a guy named Jake who looked like he could have played football, and another named Tom who had the lean build of a runner. "Hey Maya, wait up." Marcus jogged over, his gear bag slung over his shoulder. "Listen, I just wanted to make sure you're really thinking this through. I mean, it's great that you're interested in self-defense, but this place." He gestured around the gym. "This is pretty hardcore. These guys have been doing this for years." Jake nodded in agreement. "Marcus is right. Maybe you should start with some private lessons somewhere. Build up your confidence before jumping into group classes." Maya looked at the three of them, well-meaning, concerned, absolutely certain that they knew what was best for her. It was a familiar feeling, this sense of being managed and protected and carefully steered away from choices that other people deemed inappropriate for someone like her. "I appreciate the concern," Maya said quietly. "But I've made up my mind." "Look, we're not trying to discourage you," Tom said. "It's just that most of the guys here are pretty serious about this stuff. They're not going to go easy on you just because you're new. Or because you're—" He trailed off, apparently unable to find the right words. "Because I'm what?" The question hung in the air for a moment, and Maya watched the three men exchange glances. They were trying to be diplomatic, trying to find a way to say what they were thinking without sounding like jerks. "Because you're small," Marcus finally said. "And you've never done this before. And honestly, Maya, you seem like more of the academic type. There's nothing wrong with that, but this place requires a certain kind of intensity." Maya nodded slowly, as if she were considering their words carefully. "I understand what you're saying. You think I don't belong here." "That's not what we're saying," Jake protested. "We're just looking out for you, right? Well, thank you for the advice." Maya shouldered her backpack and headed for the door. "I'll see you tomorrow night." As she pushed through the exit and into the cool evening air, Maya could hear them continuing their discussion behind her. Their voices were low but urgent, and she caught fragments of their conversation, something about her getting hurt, about the intensity of the training, about whether someone should talk to Danny about discouraging her from joining. Maya walked to her car with her spine straight and her head high. But inside, a familiar anger was building. It was the same feeling she had experienced countless times before, in high school when guidance counselors had steered her away from advanced classes because she was too quiet. In college when professors had suggested she might be more comfortable in less challenging courses. In every situation where well-meaning people had decided what she was and wasn't capable of based on their assessment of her size, her demeanor, her apparent fragility. But as she drove home through the darkening streets, Maya realized that something was different this time. The anger was still there, burning in her chest like a small, steady flame. But now it was accompanied by something else, a sense of purpose that felt as solid and unshakable as stone. She had found her place. Tomorrow, she would begin to earn it. In her small apartment that night, Maya stood in front of her bathroom mirror and studied her reflection. She saw what everyone else saw, a small, quiet young woman who looked like she belonged in a library or a coffee shop, somewhere safe and contained. She saw someone who could easily be overlooked, underestimated, dismissed. For the first time in her life, Maya smiled at that reflection. Because tomorrow, she was going to begin the process of turning their assumptions into her greatest advantage. The lesson was about to begin, and Maya Rodriguez was ready to be both student and teacher. Maya arrived at Iron Fist Academy the next evening 15 minutes early, wearing a pair of black athletic shorts and a plain gray t-shirt that had belonged to her older brother. The shirt hung loose on her frame, and she had tied her long dark hair back in a ponytail that revealed the determined set of her jaw. The gym was quieter than it had been the night before, with only a few fighters warming up on the mats. Maya recognized Jennifer, the redhead from the previous evening, who was working through what looked like a complex sequence of kicks against a heavy bag. Her movements were precise and powerful, each strike landing with a satisfying thud that echoed through the space. "You came back." Danny's voice came from behind her, and Maya turned to see him approaching with a clipboard and a slight smile. "I wasn't sure you would. I said I'd be here." "Yes, you did." Danny studied her for a moment, taking in her attire and the way she stood with her feet slightly apart, ready for whatever was coming. "First lesson starts now. Rule number 1 in this gym: never make promises you can't keep. Your word is everything here. Rule number 2, leave your ego at the door. You're going to fail at things today, probably embarrassingly. That's how learning works." Maya nodded, trying to ignore the flutter of nervousness in her stomach. "What's rule number 3? That's the only 2 rules that matter. Everything else is just technique." Danny gestured toward the mats. "Come on, let's see what you're working with." The warm-up was brutal. Danny led Maya through what he called basic conditioning, which involved exercises she had never attempted in her life. Burpees that left her gasping for air, push-ups that made her arms shake after the first 5, and jumping jacks that seemed simple until her legs felt like rubber. "Don't stop," Danny said when Maya paused during a set of mountain climbers, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Your body wants to quit long before it actually needs to. The trick is learning the difference between discomfort and actual damage." Maya gritted her teeth and continued, sweat dripping onto the mat beneath her. Around them, other fighters were arriving and beginning their own warm-ups, their movements fluid and effortless compared to Maya's struggle. She caught glimpses of Marcus and his friends Jake and Tom setting up at the heavy bags, their conversation punctuated by glances in her direction. After 20 minutes that felt like an hour, Danny finally called a halt to the conditioning. Maya stood with her hands on her knees, breathing hard and trying not to let her legs collapse beneath her. "How do you feel?" "Like I might die," Maya said honestly. Danny laughed, the first genuine laugh she had heard from him. "Good. If it was easy, everyone would do it. Now we're going to learn how to stand." For the next hour, Danny taught Maya what he called the basics of basics. How to stand with her feet shoulder-width apart, her knees slightly bent, her weight distributed evenly. How to hold her hands up in a guard position, protecting her face while keeping her elbows close to her body. How to move forward and backward while maintaining balance. How to pivot on the balls of her feet. How to keep her chin down and her eyes up. To Maya, these seemed like simple concepts, things that should have been intuitive. But as Danny corrected her posture again and again, adjusting the position of her hands or the angle of her feet, she began to understand that fighting was a language with its own grammar, and she was still learning the alphabet. "Good," Danny said after Maya successfully completed a sequence of steps and pivots without losing her balance. "You're a fast learner. Most people take weeks to get comfortable with basic footwork." Maya felt a flush of pride, quickly tempered by the realization that she had just spent an hour learning how to stand and walk in a slightly different way. If this was progress, she had a long road ahead of her. "Now we're going to throw some punches." Danny positioned Maya in front of a heavy bag that seemed to loom over her like a patient adversary. He showed her how to make a proper fist, how to align her wrist and knuckles, how to engage her entire body in the motion of a punch rather than just her arm. "Power comes from the ground up," he explained, demonstrating with a slow-motion punch that still made the bag swing slightly. "Your feet, your legs, your hips, your core, your shoulders, everything works together. A punch isn't just your fist hitting something. It's your whole body expressing force through your fist." Maya's first attempt barely moved the bag. Her second was better, but Danny immediately stopped her to correct her form. Her third attempt felt more solid, the impact traveling up her arm in a way that was both satisfying and slightly alarming. Better. Again. For the next 30 minutes, Maya threw punch after punch at the heavy bag, with Danny offering constant feedback. Keep your wrist straight. Turn your hip into it. Don't drop your other hand. Step into the punch. Breathe out as you strike. Her knuckles began to sting despite the light gloves Danny had given her to wear, and her shoulders burned with fatigue. But something was happening that Maya hadn't expected. Each punch felt a little more natural, a little more connected to the rest of her body. She was beginning to understand what Danny meant about power coming from the ground up. Time for a break, Danny said, noting the sweat streaming down Maya's face. Grab some water and watch the others for a few minutes. See how they move. Maya walked to the side of the gym, her legs shaky with exhaustion, and observed the other fighters. The difference between their movements and hers was stark. Where she had been tentative and mechanical, they flowed like water. Where she had struggled to coordinate her feet and hands, they moved with an unconscious grace that made complex combinations look effortless. Jennifer was working with a training partner, practicing what Danny called pad work. Her partner held thick, padded mitts and called out combinations: jab, cross, hook, low kick, while Jennifer responded with lightning-quick strikes that popped against the pads with sharp, satisfying sounds. She makes it look easy, doesn't she? Maya turned to find Marcus beside her, sipping from a water bottle and watching Jennifer work. His tone was friendly, but Maya detected something underneath it, perhaps surprise that she was still here, or curiosity about how she was handling her first real training session. How long have you been training? Maya asked. About 8 months. I started coming here after I got jumped outside a club downtown. 3 guys, and I couldn't do anything but cover up and hope someone would call the cops. Marcus's expression darkened at the memory. I swore I'd never feel that helpless again. Maya nodded, understanding more than Marcus probably realized. Have you ever had to use what you've learned here? Not yet, thank God. But I feel different now, you know? More confident. Like I could handle myself if something happened. He paused, studying Maya's flushed face and sweat-soaked shirt. How are you holding up? Danny doesn't usually go this easy on new people. Easy. Maya wiped sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand. This is easy. Marcus laughed, but it wasn't unkind. Trust me, he's being gentle with you. When I started, he had me throwing combinations from minute 1. I think I threw up after my first class. Rodriguez. Danny's voice carried across the gym. Ready for round 2? Maya drained the rest of her water bottle and walked back to the training area, aware that several of the other fighters were watching her. She caught fragments of conversations, something about how long she would last, whether Danny was wasting his time, how she looked like she might cry. We're going to learn how to get hit, Danny said as Maya approached. The statement was so matter-of-fact that it took Maya a moment to process it. I'm sorry, what? Getting hit is part of fighting. If you can't handle being hit, you can't fight. So we're going to start with the basics. Danny picked up a pair of focus mitts. I'm going to throw very light punches at your gloves. Your job is to block them and stay calm. Maya raised her gloves in the guard position Danny had taught her, her heart rate spiking at the thought of being struck, even lightly. Danny moved slowly and telegraphed his movements clearly, tapping her gloves with controlled punches that had no real force behind them. Good. Keep your guard up. Don't flinch. Breathe. The first few punches made Maya instinctively close her eyes and tense up, her body's natural reaction to incoming threats. But Danny's movements were so controlled and predictable that she gradually began to relax, focusing on keeping her gloves in position and her breathing steady. Better. Now I'm going to aim for your body. Keep your elbows tight. Maya felt Danny's gloves tap against her ribs and stomach, each contact light, but firm enough to remind her that this was real contact, not a game. Her body wanted to panic, to drop her guard and back away, but she forced herself to stay in position. Excellent. You're not running away. That's half the battle. Danny lowered his mitts. How do you feel? Surprised, Maya said honestly. I thought it would be more scary. It's scary when someone's actually trying to hurt you. This is just conditioning, getting your body used to the idea that contact doesn't mean catastrophe. Danny glanced around the gym, noting that the other fighters were beginning to gather for the evening's main class. You've done enough for today. Go home, take a hot shower, and eat some protein. You're going to be sore tomorrow. Maya began to remove her gloves, but Danny stopped her. One more thing. I want you to hit this bag as hard as you can. Don't worry about technique. Don't think about form. Just hit it like you mean it. Maya looked at the heavy bag, then back at Danny. Why? Because I want to see what you've got inside. Technique can be taught, but that fire that makes someone really dangerous, either you have it or you don't. Maya stepped up to the bag and took the stance Danny had taught her. She thought about Marcus and his friends, about their well-meaning condescension and their assumption that she didn't belong here. She thought about every person who had ever looked at her and decided what she was capable of based on her size and appearance. She threw the punch with everything she had. The bag swung backward with a force that surprised everyone watching, including Maya. The impact traveled up her arm and into her shoulder, but instead of pain, she felt a surge of something that might have been joy. Danny smiled, and this time it reached his eyes. Yeah, you've got it. See you tomorrow night, Maya. As Maya gathered her things and prepared to leave, she noticed that the conversations around her had changed. The other fighters were still watching her, but their expressions were different now. There was something that might have been respect mixed with curiosity, as if they were seeing her for the first time. Jennifer approached her near the exit. First day? Yeah. How'd it go? Maya flexed her fingers, feeling the slight ache in her knuckles and the pleasant burn in her shoulders. Better than I expected. Jennifer nodded knowingly. Danny's good at seeing what people are really made of. Most people who look like you wouldn't last 10 minutes in here. What do you mean, people who look like me? Small, quiet, probably got picked on in school. Jennifer's tone was matter-of-fact rather than insulting. I was the same way when I started. Everyone assumed I was here to get in shape or meet guys or work out some daddy issues. They didn't expect me to actually want to learn how to fight. What changed their minds? Jennifer smiled, and there was something predatory in the expression. Time. And a lot of bruises. Mostly theirs. That night, Maya sat in her apartment with an ice pack on her knuckles and her laptop open to videos of mixed martial arts techniques. She watched professional fighters move with the same fluid grace she had observed at the gym, breaking down their movements frame by frame, trying to understand the principles behind what looked like effortless violence. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Marcus. How'd your first class go? Hope Danny wasn't too hard on you. Maya stared at the message for a long moment before typing back. It was exactly what I expected. It wasn't entirely true, of course. She had expected to struggle, to feel out of place, to question whether she belonged there. She had expected the other fighters to dismiss her, to whisper about the small girl who thought she could learn to fight. What she hadn't expected was the feeling of rightness that had settled in her chest as she worked through the basics of stance and movement. She hadn't expected the satisfaction of landing a solid punch on the heavy bag, or the way her body had responded to Danny's teaching with an eagerness that surprised her. Most of all, she hadn't expected to feel like she had finally found the place where she was supposed to be. As she prepared for bed, Maya caught her reflection in the bathroom mirror. Her face was flushed, and her hair was still damp with sweat, and there was something different in her eyes, a spark of confidence that hadn't been there that morning. Tomorrow, she would come back. Tomorrow, she would learn more about the language of fighting, about the grammar of violence, about the vocabulary of power that could be expressed through properly aligned fists and precisely placed feet. And somewhere in the back of her mind, a small voice whispered that Marcus and his friends had no idea what they had awakened when they told her she didn't belong. The lesson had begun, and Maya Rodriguez was proving to be a very quick study. 3 weeks into her training at Iron Fist Academy, Maya Rodriguez had established a routine that governed her life with military precision. She arrived at the gym every Tuesday and Thursday at exactly 6:15, spent 10 minutes warming up on her own before class began, and stayed afterward to practice the techniques Danny had shown her until the gym closed at 10. On her off days, she ran 3 miles through her neighborhood before dawn, worked through bodyweight exercises in her living room, and studied fighting videos online with the intensity of a scholar preparing for doctoral exams. Her small apartment had been transformed into a training ground, with yoga mats covering the floor and a heavy bag hanging from a ceiling mount that she had installed herself after watching instructional videos on YouTube. The physical changes were becoming evident. Maya's shoulders had broadened slightly, and her arms showed the beginning of real definition. Her core was stronger, her balance better, and her endurance had improved to the point where she could complete Danny's warm-up routines without feeling like she might collapse. But the most significant changes were less visible and more profound. Maya moved through the world differently now. Her posture was straighter, her steps more deliberate. She made eye contact more readily and spoke with a clarity that commanded attention. The quiet girl who had once tried to make herself invisible was learning to take up space with confidence. At the gym, her progress had not gone unnoticed. Danny praised her dedication and her willingness to absorb criticism without defensiveness. Jennifer had begun including Maya in conversations about technique and strategy, treating her like a serious student rather than a curious tourist. But it was the reaction of Marcus and his training partners that provided Maya with the most satisfaction. Their initial condescension had evolved into something that looked suspiciously like nervousness. "She's getting pretty good," Maya heard Jake whisper to Tom as they watched her work through a combination on the heavy bag. Her punches had developed real snap, and the bag swung with authority under her strikes. "Danny's been giving her a lot of attention," Tom replied. "Think he sees something special in her." Marcus, for his part, had become increasingly awkward in his interactions with Maya. His easy confidence seemed to evaporate whenever she was around, replaced by an uncertainty that suggested he was beginning to question his initial assessment of her capabilities. The moment of truth came on a Thursday evening in early April. Danny had announced that the class would be working on controlled sparring, light contact exercises designed to let students practice their techniques against resisting opponents. "Everyone partner up," Danny called out. "Experienced students with beginners, similar size when possible. We're working on basic combinations and defensive movement." Maya looked around the room, expecting to be paired with Jennifer or one of the other women. Instead, she found herself face to face with Marcus, who had approached her with an expression that mixed determination with something that might have been dread. "Want to work together?" he asked, his voice carrying a forced casualness. "I could use the practice against someone smaller and quicker." Maya nodded, recognizing the challenge buried in his seemingly reasonable request. "Sure, that sounds good." They donned headgear and gloves while Danny explained the rules. Light contact only, focus on technique rather than power, and stop immediately when he called time. The goal was to practice applying techniques against a moving, thinking opponent, not to hurt anyone. "This should be interesting," Jennifer murmured to her training partner, loud enough for Maya to hear. Marcus has been talking for weeks about how he could help Maya with her technique. Maya and Marcus touched gloves and began to circle each other on the mat. Maya had sparred with other students before, but always under carefully controlled conditions, and usually with partners who were explicitly instructed to go easy on her. This felt different. There was an edge to Marcus's movements, a seriousness that suggested he intended to prove something. Marcus threw the first punch, a jab that was supposed to be light, but carried more force than the agreed-upon contact level. Maya slipped it cleanly, the way Danny had taught her, letting the punch slide past her head while she pivoted to the side. The movement was so smooth and instinctive that it surprised both of them. Marcus reset and tried again, this time with a combination, jab, cross, hook. Maya blocked the first two punches with her gloves and ducked under the hook, her body responding with muscle memory that had been drilled into her through hundreds of repetitions. She could see the frustration building in Marcus's eyes. His punches were becoming harder, his movements more aggressive. What had started as a controlled sparring session was evolving into something that felt more like a test of wills. "Easy, Marcus," Danny called from across the room, where he was monitoring multiple sparring pairs. "Remember, we're working on technique." Marcus nodded, but didn't decrease his intensity. If anything, he seemed to take Danny's correction as a challenge to be more technical in his aggression. He threw a low kick aimed at Maya's thigh, followed by a straight punch toward her body. Maya checked the kick with her shin and used her elbow to block the punch, exactly as she had been taught. But instead of simply defending, she found herself responding with a quick jab that snapped Marcus's head back and made him blink in surprise. The punch had been clean, controlled, and perfectly timed. It was also harder than it should have been. "Time," Danny called, and all the sparring pairs stopped their practice. "Switch partners, everyone. I want you working with different people." But Maya noticed that Danny was walking directly toward her, and Marcus, his expression unreadable. "Everything okay over here?" he asked, his eyes moving between them. "Yeah, we're good," Marcus said, but Maya could hear the tight control in his voice. "Maya's got good reflexes." "She does," Danny agreed. "Maya, how did that feel?" Maya considered the question carefully. The honest answer was that it had felt incredible. The rush of successfully defending against attacks and landing clean counters had been intoxicating. But she also sensed that Marcus was struggling with something deeper than just a sparring session gone slightly too hard. It felt good to practice against someone with more experience, she said diplomatically. Danny studied both of their faces for a moment longer, then nodded. Marcus, work with Tom for the next round. Maya, you're with Jennifer. As Marcus walked away, Maya caught him talking quietly with Jake and Tom. Their conversation was intense and hushed, punctuated by glances in her direction. She couldn't hear the words, but their body language suggested that Marcus was upset about something more than just a routine sparring session. Jennifer approached with a grin that suggested she had been watching the interaction between Maya and Marcus with great interest. Well, that was fun to watch, she said as they touched gloves. Marcus looked like he swallowed something unpleasant. Was I too aggressive? Jennifer laughed. Maya, that was probably the most controlled I've ever seen you in sparring. Marcus is just having trouble adjusting to the fact that you're not the helpless little girl he thought you were when you first walked in here. Their sparring session was entirely different. Jennifer was more experienced and skilled than Marcus, but she approached the exercise as a teacher rather than someone with something to prove. She threw techniques that challenged Maya without overwhelming her, offering coaching and encouragement between exchanges. Good, slip the jab and counter. Better, now keep your hands up after you throw. Excellent. That hook had real snap to it. Maya found herself relaxing into the flow of the session, her movements becoming more fluid and instinctive. She was beginning to understand what Danny meant when he talked about fighting as a conversation, action and reaction, attack and defense, each person responding to the other in a complex dance of applied violence. When the sparring session ended, Maya felt energized rather than exhausted. Her technique was improving, her timing was getting better, and her confidence in her ability to handle herself was growing stronger every day. But, as she was changing out of her gear, she overheard a conversation that reminded her that not everyone was pleased with her progress. I'm telling you, Danny's making a mistake with her, Marcus was saying to Jake and Tom near the locker area. She doesn't understand what this place is really about. She's treating it like a game. What do you mean? Tom asked. Did you see how she was sparring tonight? She was smiling. No one should be smiling when they're getting hit in the face. It's like she doesn't take any of this seriously. Jake nodded in agreement. And she's been getting all of Danny's attention. Meanwhile, the rest of us have been training here for months, and we're getting less instruction time because he's babysitting the new girl. Maya felt a familiar anger building in her chest, but this time it was accompanied by something new, a cold calculation that surprised her with its clarity. She finished packing her gear and approached the three men with a calm that felt almost predatory. Marcus, she said quietly, and all three of them turned to look at her. Can I talk to you for a minute? Marcus glanced at his friends, then nodded. Sure, what's up? Maya waited until Jake and Tom had moved away, then stepped closer to Marcus so that their conversation would be private. When she spoke, her voice was soft but carried an edge that made Marcus straighten unconsciously. I heard what you said about me treating this like a game. Marcus's face flushed, but he didn't deny it. Maya, I wasn't trying to. Yes, you were. And that's fine. Everyone's entitled to their opinion. Maya's tone remained calm and conversational. But I want to make sure we understand each other. What do you mean? Maya studied his face for a moment, noting the way his eyes flickered toward his friends, the slight tension in his shoulders, the defensive posture he had unconsciously adopted. I mean that I don't want there to be any confusion about why I'm here or what I'm trying to accomplish. So let me be very clear. She paused, ensuring she had his full attention. I'm not here to make friends. I'm not here to get in shape or boost my confidence or work through personal issues. I'm here to learn how to fight. Really fight. Marcus opened his mouth to respond, but Maya continued. And I'm not going anywhere. No matter what you think, no matter what you say to your friends, no matter how uncomfortable my presence makes you feel, I'm going to keep coming back, and I'm going to keep getting better, and eventually I'm going to be better than you. The last statement hung in the air between them like a challenge that couldn't be ignored. Maya could see Marcus processing her words, his expression shifting from surprise to something that looked like indignation. Maya, I think you're misunderstanding, am I? Maya interrupted, her voice still quiet, but now carrying a steel that made Marcus take a step back. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're threatened by the fact that the little girl you tried to discourage is learning faster than you did. And that bothers you because it forces you to question whether you're as good as you thought you were. Marcus's face had gone from flushed to pale. That's not. I never said. You didn't have to say it. But here's the thing. Marcus, I don't care what you think about me or whether you think I belong here. Your approval was never something I needed. And Your disapproval isn't something that's going to stop me. Maya shouldered her gym bag and turned to leave, then paused and looked back at him. Oh, and Marcus? Next time you want to test me in sparring, just ask. I'm always happy to help you with your technique. As Maya walked toward the exit, she could feel the eyes of everyone in the gym following her. The conversation had been quiet enough that the specifics wouldn't have been overheard, but the tension between her and Marcus had been impossible to miss. Danny intercepted her near the door. Everything all right? Maya looked up at him and smiled, an expression that was warm but carried an edge of something that might have been dangerous. Everything's perfect, Danny. See you Tuesday. That night, Maya stood in her apartment bathroom and studied her reflection in the mirror. The quiet, uncertain girl who had first walked into Iron Fist Academy was still there, but she was changing into something else, something stronger, more confident, and infinitely more dangerous. She thought about Marcus's surprise at her improvement, about the way he had struggled to land clean shots during their sparring session, about the frustration in his voice when he talked to his friends about her progress. Maya smiled at her reflection, and this time there was nothing uncertain about the expression. She was beginning to understand that the greatest weapon she possessed wasn't her growing technical skill or her improving physical conditioning. It was the fact that no one saw her coming until it was too late. The lesson was accelerating, and Maya Rodriguez was proving to be an exceptional student. 2 months after Maya's confrontation with Marcus, the atmosphere at Iron Fist Academy had shifted in subtle but undeniable ways. Maya had become a fixture in the gym's ecosystem, her presence no longer causing the ripples of curiosity and concern it once had. She arrived precisely on time for every class, trained with an intensity that impressed even the most dedicated students, and asked questions that demonstrated a deep understanding of fighting principles. But beneath the surface calm, tensions were building. Maya's progress had accelerated beyond what anyone, including Danny, had expected. Her natural athleticism, combined with an almost obsessive dedication to training, had compressed what should have been months of development into weeks. She moved with increasing confidence and fluidity, her techniques becoming more polished and her timing more precise. More importantly, she had developed something that couldn't be taught, a fighting instinct that allowed her to read opponents and respond to threats with an efficiency that bordered on uncanny. This progress had not gone unnoticed by the other students, particularly the group of men who had initially dismissed her as a temporary curiosity. Marcus, Jake, and Tom had watched her transformation with a mixture of resentment and disbelief, their casual superiority eroded by the undeniable evidence of her rapidly developing skills. The situation came to a head on a warm Thursday evening in late May. The gym was more crowded than usual, with several visitors from other martial arts schools attending Danny's class as part of an informal exchange program. The presence of outsiders had added an element of competitive tension to the evening's training. Danny had announced that the night's focus would be on advanced sparring concepts, including more intensive contact and longer rounds. Maya had been looking forward to the session, eager to test her developing skills against more challenging opponents. As the class warmed up, Maya noticed Marcus talking quietly with 2 of the visiting students, both large, experienced-looking men who carried themselves with the casual confidence of people who had been fighting for years. There was something about their body language, the way they glanced in her direction during the conversation, that made Maya's instincts prick up. Maya, Danny called out as the sparring session began. You're with Rodriguez tonight. Maya looked around, confused, then realized that Danny was referring to one of the visiting students, a stocky man with heavily muscled arms and the scarred knuckles of someone who had spent considerable time hitting things harder than training pads. Rodriguez was at least 6 inches taller than Maya and probably outweighed her by 60 pounds. His introduction to the class had revealed that he was a former amateur boxing champion who now trained mixed martial arts at a gym across town. As Maya approached him for the sparring session, she caught Marcus watching with an expression of barely concealed anticipation. It occurred to her that this pairing was not accidental. First time sparring with someone from outside your gym? Rodriguez asked as they touched gloves. His tone was friendly enough, but there was something calculating in his eyes. Yes, Maya replied simply. Don't worry, I'll take it easy on you. The condescension in his voice was so familiar that Maya almost smiled. How many times had she heard variations of that same promise? How many people had assured her that they would be gentle, that they understood her limitations, that they would help her learn by going easy on her? What Rodriguez didn't understand was that Maya had moved far beyond needing anyone to go easy on her. The sparring session began normally enough. Rodriguez threw light jabs and crosses, testing Maya's defenses and movement. Maya responded with the technical precision that had become her trademark: clean blocks, efficient counters, and footwork that kept her out of range of his most dangerous attacks. But as the round progressed, Rodriguez's strikes began to carry more force. What had started as light technical work was gradually escalating into something more serious. Maya could see the shift in his demeanor. The friendly smile had been replaced by a focused intensity that suggested he was no longer holding back. A hard cross caught Maya on the side of her headgear, snapping her head to the side and making her ears ring. The punch was well beyond the agreed-upon contact level for the session. "Sorry," Rodriguez said, but his tone suggested he wasn't sorry at all. "You moved into that one." Maya reset her guard and continued sparring, but she was now fully alert to the possibility that this had become something more than a training exercise. Rodriguez's next combination, a jab, cross, hook sequence, was thrown with real intent, each punch carrying enough force to cause serious damage if it landed cleanly. Maya slipped the jab, blocked the cross with her glove, and ducked under the hook with a fluid movement that positioned her perfectly for a counterattack. Without thinking, she drove a short uppercut into Rodriguez's body, just below his ribcage. The punch landed with a solid thump that made Rodriguez grunt and step back, his eyes widening with surprise and something that might have been respect. "Nice shot," he said, but there was no friendliness left in his voice now. "Let's see what else you've got." What followed was no longer sparring in any conventional sense. Rodriguez attacked with the calculated aggression of someone who was serious about inflicting damage, throwing combinations that were designed to overwhelm Maya's defenses and land with maximum impact. But something remarkable was happening. Instead of being overwhelmed, Maya was rising to meet the challenge. Her movements became more fluid and instinctive, her counters more precise and powerful. She was entering a state that Danny had once described to her as the flow, a condition where conscious thought disappeared and fighting became as natural as breathing. Maya slipped a hard right hand and responded with a left hook that caught Rodriguez cleanly on the jaw. The impact was solid and perfectly timed, and Rodriguez's head snapped to the side with a force that made several of the watching students gasp. For a moment, Rodriguez looked genuinely stunned. He had clearly expected to overwhelm the small woman who had been described to him as a beginner, and instead he was finding himself engaged in a genuine fight with someone who was matching him technique for technique. "Time!" Danny's voice cut through the gym, and both fighters immediately stopped and touched gloves. The room was silent for a moment, then filled with a buzz of conversation as the watching students processed what they had just witnessed. Maya had not just survived a sparring session with a much larger, more experienced opponent. She had held her own and landed several clean shots that had clearly affected him. Rodriguez removed his headgear and looked at Maya with an expression of genuine respect. "Where did you learn to hit like that?" "Here," Maya said simply. Rodriguez nodded slowly, then extended his hand. "You've got real talent. Keep training hard." As Rodriguez walked away, Maya became aware that the entire gym was watching her. Some of the students looked impressed, others seemed surprised, and a few appeared to be reassessing their previous opinions of her capabilities. But it was Marcus's expression that caught Maya's attention. He looked stricken, as if he had just witnessed something that challenged his fundamental understanding of how the world was supposed to work. Danny approached Maya as she was removing her gloves. "How do you feel?" Maya considered the question. She felt energized, focused, and oddly calm. The sparring session had been intense and challenging, but she had never felt out of control or overwhelmed. "Good," she said. "Really good." Danny studied her face for a moment. "Maya, we need to talk. Can you stay after class?" The rest of the evening passed in a blur of technique drills and conditioning exercises, but Maya was aware of the constant attention from the other students. Word of her sparring session with Rodriguez had spread through the gym, and she could hear fragments of conversation as people discussed what they had witnessed. After the class ended and most of the students had left, Danny gestured for Maya to join him in his small office adjacent to the main training area. The space was cramped and utilitarian, filled with fight posters, tournament brackets, and photographs of Danny with various fighters he had trained over the years. "Maya, I want to talk to you about what happened tonight," Danny began, settling into his chair behind a desk covered with training schedules and equipment catalogs. Did I do something wrong? No, you did everything right. That's what I want to talk about. Danny leaned forward, his expression serious. Maya, in 6 months of training, you've progressed farther than most people do in 2 years. Your technique is solid, your timing is excellent, and your fight IQ is off the charts. Maya waited for him to continue, sensing that there was more coming. But what happened tonight? That wasn't just technical skill. When Rodriguez stepped up the intensity, you didn't back down or get overwhelmed. You matched him and gave as good as you got. That's not something that can be taught. What are you saying? Danny was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. I'm saying that you have the potential to be really, really good at this. Not just good for someone your size, or good for a beginner, or good considering your background. I mean genuinely elite. The statement hung in the air between them. Maya had known that she was improving rapidly, but she had always assumed that her progress would level off once the initial beginner's gains wore off. The idea that she might have genuine talent, not just dedication and work ethic, but actual natural ability, was something she had never seriously considered. What does that mean practically? It means that if you're interested, I'd like to start training you more seriously. Advanced techniques, competition-level conditioning, maybe even look at getting you into some amateur tournaments. Danny paused. But, Maya, I need to be clear about what that would involve. Real fight training is different from what we've been doing. It's harder, more intense, and it requires a level of commitment that most people can't maintain. Maya thought about the offer, considering what it would mean to commit to serious competitive training. More hours in the gym, more intensive conditioning, more sparring sessions like the one she had just experienced with Rodriguez. The prospect excited her in a way that surprised her with its intensity. I want to do it, she said without hesitation. Danny smiled, but there was something almost worried in his expression. Maya, there's one more thing we need to discuss. Your progress hasn't gone unnoticed by the other students, and not all of them are happy about it. Marcus in particular seems to be having trouble adjusting to your development. I know. Do you? Because I think the situation is more serious than you realize. Marcus talked to Rodriguez before class tonight. He specifically asked him to test you during sparring. The information hit Maya like a physical blow. She had suspected that the pairing with Rodriguez hadn't been accidental, but hearing confirmation that Marcus had deliberately arranged for her to be challenged by a much larger, more experienced opponent triggered a rage that was almost overwhelming in its intensity. He what? Maya, calm down. Rodriguez is a good guy, and he wouldn't have seriously hurt you. But the intent was to humble you, to show you and everyone else that you weren't as good as you seemed to think you were. Maya stood up abruptly, her hands clenched into fists. And, instead, I proved that I was better than he expected. Yes, you did. But, Maya, this situation with Marcus and his friends is going to get worse before it gets better. Success in fighting often creates enemies, especially when that success challenges people's assumptions about who should be successful. Maya looked at Danny, seeing the concern in his eyes, and felt something cold and calculating settle in her chest. Marcus had tried to arrange for her humiliation, had specifically sought out a larger, more experienced fighter to put her in her place. Instead, she had risen to the challenge and proven herself capable of competing with anyone in the gym. Danny, can I ask you something? Of course. If someone wanted to arrange a sparring session between me and Marcus, would you allow it? Danny was quiet for a long moment, studying Maya's face with an expression that mixed concern with something that might have been pride. Maya, are you sure that's a road you want to go down? Maya thought about the question, considering all the implications of what she was asking. A direct confrontation with Marcus would change everything. Her position in the gym, her relationships with the other students, her own understanding of what she was capable of when truly tested. But Marcus had made his choice when he arranged for Rodriguez to test her. He had declared war, and now Maya was going to finish it. Yes, she said quietly. I'm sure. Danny nodded slowly. Then, yes, if both parties agree to it, I would allow it. But, Maya, understand that once that happens, there's no going back. Win or lose, everything changes after that. Maya smiled, and there was something in the expression that would have made Marcus very nervous if he had seen it. Everything's already changed, Danny. This would just make it official. As Maya left the gym that night, she could feel the anticipation building in her chest like a small, steady fire. Marcus had tried to break her confidence, and instead had given her the opportunity to prove herself against serious competition. Now it was time to return the favor. The lesson was about to enter its final phase, and Maya Rodriguez was ready to graduate. The challenge was issued on a Tuesday evening 3 weeks after Maya's sparring session with Rodriguez. Marcus had spent those weeks watching Maya train with increasing intensity under Danny's advanced coaching, her skills developing at a pace that seemed to mock his own months of gradual progress. Maya had not confronted Marcus directly about his arrangement with Rodriguez. Instead, she had let her training speak for itself, working through advanced combinations with a precision that drew admiring comments from other students, sparring with visiting fighters who left the gym talking about the small woman with the devastating timing. But Marcus's frustration had been building like pressure in a sealed container, and on this particular evening, it finally found its release. "I want to spar with Maya," he announced to Danny as the class was preparing for the night's training session. His voice carried across the gym, ensuring that everyone present would hear the challenge. The conversation that had been flowing through the room stopped abruptly. Students paused in their warm-up routines and turned to look at Marcus, then at Maya, then at Danny. Maya finished lacing her gloves and looked up at Marcus with an expression of mild curiosity. "That's fine with me." Danny studied both of their faces carefully. He had been expecting this moment for weeks, watching the tension between them build to an inevitable confrontation. "This is sparring, not a fight. Control yourselves, follow my instructions, and stop when I tell you to stop." Marcus nodded eagerly. Maya simply waited. 5-minute round, Danny continued. "Normal sparring gear, medium contact. I'll be watching closely, and if either of you gets carried away, the session ends immediately." As Maya and Marcus donned their headgear and prepared for the sparring session, the other students gathered around the mat area. There was an electric tension in the air, the sense that something significant was about to happen. Jennifer appeared at Maya's side as she was adjusting her headgear. "You sure about this?" Maya looked across the mat at Marcus, who was warming up with shadow boxing that looked more like preparation for a real fight than a sparring session. "He's been wanting this since the day I walked in here. Better to get it over with." "Maya," Jennifer said quietly, "Marcus is bigger than you, stronger than you, and he's been training longer than you have. Don't let your recent success make you overconfident." Maya smiled, and there was something in the expression that Jennifer had never seen before, a cold confidence that seemed almost predatory. "Jennifer, trust me on this one." As the two fighters moved to the center of the mat, Danny gathered the watching students around him. "This is a learning opportunity for everyone. Watch how they move, how they react to pressure, how they adapt their strategies. Take notes." Maya and Marcus touched gloves, and for a moment they stood facing each other in the center of the mat. Marcus was breathing hard, his face flushed with adrenaline and determination. Maya looked calm, almost relaxed, her breathing steady and controlled. "Fight," Danny called. Marcus attacked immediately, launching a combination that was designed to overwhelm Maya before she could establish a rhythm. Jab, cross, hook, low kick, a sequence thrown with more power and speed than any sparring session should have seen. But Maya wasn't there when the punches arrived. She slipped the jab with minimal movement, leaned back from the cross, ducked under the hook, and stepped away from the low kick with a fluidity that made Marcus's aggressive attack look clumsy and overcommit. Before Marcus could reset, Maya responded with a simple 1-2 combination, jab, cross, that landed cleanly on his headgear with sharp, snapping impacts. The exchange lasted perhaps 3 seconds, but it told the entire story of what was about to unfold. Marcus was fighting with emotion and aggression. Maya was fighting with precision and control. Marcus circled to his right, trying to use his longer reach to keep Maya at distance while he looked for openings. He threw a series of probing jabs, testing Maya's defensive reactions. Maya responded by closing distance, slipping inside Marcus's jabs, and landing quick combinations to his body and head. Her punches were economical and precise, each strike landing exactly where she intended it to land. "Good movement, Maya," Danny called out. "Marcus, you're telegraphing your punches. Relax." But Marcus was beyond relaxation now. The ease with which Maya was handling his attacks was triggering something deeper than frustration, a primal need to prove his dominance that was overriding his technical training. He threw a hard right cross that was intended to end the sparring session decisively. The punch carried real malicious intent, thrown with enough force to cause serious damage if it landed cleanly. Maya saw it coming from the moment Marcus began to load up for the punch. She slipped it with minimal effort, letting the fist whistle past her ear while she stepped in close and drove a short left hook into Marcus's ribs. The impact was perfectly placed and timed. Marcus doubled over slightly, the air rushing out of his lungs in a sharp exhalation. Before he could recover, Maya stepped back and landed a clean jab to his face that snapped his head back and made him stumble backward. "That's enough," Danny started to call, but Marcus waved him off. "I'm fine," Marcus gasped, straightening up and raising his gloves again. "Keep going." Danny looked at Maya, who nodded calmly. "Continue," he said, but his voice carried a warning that both fighters heard clearly. What followed was not really a sparring session in any conventional sense. It was an education in the difference between aggression and skill, between wanting to win and knowing how to win. Marcus threw everything he had learned in 8 months of training at Maya. Combinations from his boxing background, kicks from his kickboxing classes, even some grappling attempts that Danny would normally have discouraged in a striking-focused sparring session. Nothing worked. Maya moved like water around Marcus's attacks, her footwork keeping her just out of range of his most dangerous strikes while positioning her perfectly for counterattacks. When Marcus tried to overwhelm her with volume, she picked off his punches with precise blocks and parries. When he tried to use his size advantage by pressing forward and smothering her movement, she used angles and timing to create space and land clean shots. But, most devastatingly, Maya was landing at will. Every time Marcus committed to an attack, Maya was already responding with perfectly timed counters that found their mark with mechanical precision. Jabs that snapped his head back, hooks that caught him on the temple, uppercuts that landed just under his guard. The watching students had gone completely silent, mesmerized by the technical clinic they were witnessing. This wasn't just one fighter beating another. This was a demonstration of the difference between someone who had learned techniques and someone who understood fighting. 3 minutes into the 5-minute round, Marcus was breathing heavily, his movements becoming sluggish and desperate. Maya looked like she could have continued for hours, her breathing still controlled, her movements still crisp and precise. Marcus threw a wild haymaker that would have knocked Maya unconscious if it had landed. Instead, Maya ducked under it and came up with an uppercut that caught Marcus cleanly on the chin. The impact lifted Marcus off his feet slightly and sent him stumbling backward until he hit the wall of the gym. For a moment, he stood there with a glazed expression, clearly stunned by the force of the blow. "Time," Danny called sharply, stepping between the two fighters. Maya immediately stepped back and lowered her gloves, her expression shifting from focused intensity to normal alertness in an instant. Marcus, on the other hand, remained against the wall for several seconds, shaking his head as if trying to clear his vision. The gym was completely silent. When Marcus finally pushed himself off the wall and removed his headgear, his face was a map of the punishment he had absorbed. His left eye was already beginning to swell, his nose was bleeding slightly, and there were red marks on his cheeks and forehead where Maya's punches had found their mark. Maya, by contrast, looked essentially unmarked. Her breathing was slightly elevated, but she showed no signs of having been in a difficult fight. Marcus walked to the center of the mat where Maya was waiting and extended his hand. When she took it, he looked directly into her eyes with an expression that contained no trace of his former condescension. "I was wrong about you," he said quietly, his voice carrying clearly in the silent gym. "I'm sorry." Maya studied his face for a moment, seeing something there that she hadn't seen before. Genuine respect mixed with the kind of humility that only comes from having your assumptions completely shattered. "We're good, Marcus," she said simply. As the two fighters walked off the mat, the other students began to stir, conversations breaking out in hushed tones as they processed what they had just witnessed. But Maya was already focused on the next phase of her training, the advanced techniques that Danny would teach her, the competitions that lay ahead. Danny approached her as she was removing her gloves. "How do you feel?" Maya considered the question seriously. She felt calm, satisfied, and strangely sad. The confrontation with Marcus had been inevitable from the moment she first walked into the gym, but now that it was over, she found herself mourning the loss of the motivation that his skepticism had provided. "Like I just graduated," she said. Danny laughed, understanding exactly what she meant. "Maya, this was just the beginning. What you showed tonight, that kind of natural fighting ability, it's rare. With the right training and competition experience, you could go as far as you want in this sport." Maya looked around the gym, taking in the faces of the other students. Some looked impressed, others seemed to be reassessing their previous opinions of her, and a few appeared to be seeing her clearly for the first time. But what struck her most was the absence of the doubt and condescension that had characterized so many of her interactions since she first walked through the doors of Iron Fist Academy. She had earned something that couldn't be given or taught, the respect of people who understood what real fighting ability looked like. "Danny," she said, "I want to start competition training next week. I was hoping you'd say that. There's a local tournament in 2 months. Nothing too serious, but it would be good experience." Maya nodded, already imagining the training sessions ahead, the technical refinements she would need to make, the additional conditioning she would need to undertake. But, mostly, she was thinking about how much she was looking forward to stepping into a ring or cage where no one would know her story, where she would be judged solely on her ability to impose her will on someone who was trying to do the same to her. As she gathered her gear and prepared to leave the gym, Jennifer approached her with an expression of genuine admiration. "Maya, that was incredible. I've been training here for 2 years, and I've never seen anything like that." "Thanks. Can I ask you something? When you first walked in here, did you know you were going to be this good?" Maya considered the question carefully. Had she known? Or had she simply been desperate enough to discover what she was capable of when truly tested? "No," she said finally. "But I knew I was going to find out." That night, Maya sat in her apartment with an ice pack on her knuckles, not because they were injured, but because it was part of the post-training routine that had become as natural to her as breathing. She thought about the journey that had brought her from the uncertain young woman who had first pressed her face against the gym window to the fighter who had just systematically dismantled someone with months more experience. The physical transformation had been remarkable, but it paled in comparison to the internal changes. Maya Rodriguez was no longer someone who could be dismissed, underestimated, or ignored. She had become someone who commanded respect through demonstrated competence, who occupied space with confidence, who responded to challenges by rising to meet them. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. When she opened it, she found a message from Rodriguez, the fighter who had tested her weeks earlier. "Heard about your sparring session tonight. Congratulations on proving what I suspected when we worked together. You're the real deal." Maya smiled and set the phone aside. Tomorrow, she would begin preparing for the next phase of her journey. Real competition against fighters who had trained their entire lives for the opportunity to test themselves against the best. But, tonight, she allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. The lesson was complete, and Maya Rodriguez had proven to be both an exceptional student and an unforgettable teacher. The girl who had walked into Iron Fist Academy seeking to learn self-defense had instead discovered something far more valuable: the unshakable knowledge of what she was capable of when she stopped accepting other people's limitations as her own. The transformation was complete, but the real fighting was just beginning.